reconvening tonight's meeting. We had began at 6:30 this evening in closed session to meet with staff and the city labor attorney to receive a briefing and legal advice on collective bargaining negotiations with ASME Local 3399. The meeting was closed pursuant to Annotated Code of Maryland General Provisions 3-305B7, which permits a meeting to be closed to consult with counsel to receive legal advice, and 3-305B9, which permits a meeting to be closed to discuss matters related to collective bargaining negotiations. And so we are reconvening our meeting now, and I just want to make sure, yes, Councilmember Landman is back. Thank you so much, Councilmember Landman. And Councilmember Westlake is here, and Councilmember DeBala will be joining us as well. And so with that, I am going to run through our rolling agenda, and I just want to make sure I have it, and I don't believe that I do. I will just make sure I can read it off of my phone. Pardon me for 1 second as I look up our rolling agenda. Okay. We have no changes to tonight's agenda. This evening, we will have a series of I just want to make sure that everything.
Mayor, point of order.
Yes.
I believe that we wanted to make some modifications to discussions on the committee appointments.
Okay.
I think we may need to have some further discussion, so I'm not sure if we want to remove it completely from the agenda or discuss around some of the changes we might want to make.
Is it for all committees or some?
It's two particular applicants, so we can just put it all on hold and have discussions later on those two applicants, or
What we could do, are those two applicants on specific committees?
one is on a committee or recommended for a committee. And there's been a recommendation from one of our colleagues to add that individual to another committee. And then there was a question about a second choice for one applicant and whether or not we were considering. And we haven't had discussions yet.
Okay. If you like, the impacted committees can be pulled from tonight's consent agenda. We can move forward with a vote for the others. When it comes up for a vote, you can request that we table the impacted committees so that the committee, the working group, can have more time to discuss those potential changes, and then we can bring it back next week.
Mayor, may I speak? Yeah, Councilmember Schlegel, does that sound acceptable to you? Yes. Okay.
Okay. So I'm just going to rely on the committee members when we get to that item. It is a consent agenda item, so we just ask for us to remove those items from the consent agenda, and then we will table them for next week, and then the council will vote on the remaining items in the consent agenda.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. So this evening, we have the voting sessions. This evening is the first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 8.24, Police Employees Retirement Plan to adjust the participant contribution amount and normal retirement benefits. The second item is a resolution providing direction to the consultant and staff regarding the rent stabilization policy review. And then, as we just discussed, there's a consent agenda this evening that includes appointments to a number of committees, the Arts and Humanities Committee, the Board of Elections Commission on Landlord-Tenant Affairs, Emergency Preparedness Committee, the Ethics Commission, the Grants Review Committee, and the Recreation Committee, as well as the Sustainable Maryland Committee and the Tree Commission. We will also have tonight a work session on the multi-year tree planting contract. And so with that, just trying to find this ruling because I don't have a printed copy of it. The ruling agenda. And I've opened it. Okay, perfect. So on Wednesday, July the 18th, the council will meet at its regular time of 7:30. We will begin with a presentation of the fleet lease analysis study. We will also have a voting session that evening. The first is a single reading ordinance approving a contract for multi-year tree planting. A second reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 8.24, Police Employees Retirement Plan to adjust the participant contribution amount. We will also have work sessions that evening. There will need to be a adjustment to this, but the work sessions include the FY27 Budget Amendment Number 1, options to implement a Community Connectors program, and there's an error in terms of the item that's posted for the rolling agenda. We will only discuss the next steps in discussion of the four-year council terms. That's the only item that will be on the agenda for council discussion on the 15th. On the 22nd, the council will meet at its regular time of 7:30. We will begin with a presentation to address unlawful restricted covenants. We will have a voting session, the corrections to the rolling agenda. It will be the first reading ordinance approving the FY27 Budget Amendment Number 1, as well as the resolution. Okay, it should be the resolution, the voting on the resolution providing for direction on the four-year council terms. On the 22nd, we will have work sessions for the council. Those work sessions would include the resolution ensuring trans and non-binary protections and the resolution committing to respectful, constructive, and dignified discourse during public meetings. So again, just so that everybody understands, on the 15th, we will discuss the four-year council term resolution that was on the table that will need to be officially voted on. On the 22nd, we will vote on that item. On the 22nd, we will have work sessions on the resolution to ensure trans and non-binary protections and the resolution committing to respective, constructive, and dignified discourse during public meetings. And on the 29th is when we will vote on those items. So we will have on Wednesday, July the 29th, the council will meet at its regular time of 7:30. We begin with a presentation from MHP on plans for the 7513 Maple Avenue. The voting sessions that evening will include the resolution regarding restricted covenants, the second reading ordinance approving the FY27 Budget Amendment Number 1, the resolution committing to respectful, constructive, and dignified discourse during public meetings, the resolution ensuring trans and non-binary protections, the resolution setting forth dates for the City Council's summer recess. And we will also have a work session that evening which will be the Public Safety Task Force Annual Report. And we will make sure that the updated rolling agenda is corrected and added to the website. On Wednesday, August the 5th, the council will likely be in recess, but we have slated a tentative meeting in case it is needed. And then the council will return from its recess on September the 9th. And so with that, we're going to move into public comments on voting items this evening. Again, the voting items include the first reading ordinance amending Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 8.24, Police Employees Retirement Plan to adjust the participant contribution amount in normal retirement benefits. The resolution providing direction to the consultant and staff regarding the rent stabilization policy review, and the consent agenda making appointments to the city's various boards and committees. Do we have any public comments this evening on voting items?
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I'm Saul Schneiderman from Ward 3. I understand that tonight you're going to vote on a resolution directing staff and the consultants to identify certain areas of the rent stabilization review which you believe will need deeper analysis. One of the 6 items listed is rent ceilings and floors. For decades, our city has set the annual rent stabilization allowance as, quote, equal to the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI, from March in the preceding year to March in the current year. And currently, that amount is 3.3%. Now, I'm one of the many foot soldiers in CVT's petition drive to protect our rent stabilization program, and so tonight, I am disappointed because I thought that our CPI formula was sacrosanct and wasn't going to change. Our use of the CPI, which is the primary tool used by economists and governments to track inflation, is fair, and it makes a lot of sense. It says to tenants, there is inflation, a rise in prices, so your rent's going to have to be adjusted upward. It says to landlords, you deserve to make a reasonable profit and not be burdened by inflation, so you can raise the rent accordingly. And for the landlords, if you believe that your operating costs have increased, you can file for a fair return rent increase, and if approved, may charge more than what the law authorizes. Now, over the past 20 years, the annual rate of inflation has varied, but basically it has stayed around an average of 2.5%. Yes, there were highs, 7% in 2021 and 6.5% in 2022. Due to the pandemic, and there was an extreme low, believe it or not, 0.09% in 2008 during the financial crisis. Now, could it be that your desire to tinker with the CPI formula, inserting a floor and a ceiling, is a way to account for these unusual highs and lows, and unusual lows? And if so, will this tinkering end up raising the monthly rent for Tacoma Park renters, 84% of whom are non-white, almost half of whom make less than $50,000 a year, as you have pointed out in your racial consideration statement? Regarding these highs and lows, please do not legislate based on exception to the rule. Sometimes this is called policymaking by exception. Keep the current CPI formula. It leads to predictable rents, longer tenancies, and lower turnover rates, which are stable outcomes for tenants and for landlords. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other general public comments on voting items this evening? Okay, come on down.
Colleen Cordes, Ward 1. Thank you for deleting the whereases that wrongly describe stability, choice, and quality as the city's top housing goals. However, the new draft still suggests areas for potential changes that could seriously weaken rent stabilization, especially changes to exemptions for new construction, how utility costs are handled, and rent floors. What makes it more likely proposed changes will harm residents is that this new draft still fails to mention the need to evaluate all policy options through a race equity lens, and that is in our official Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, emphasizes repeatedly, all the way along with policymaking, emphasize focus everything through a racial equity lens. It also fails to mention two of the major goals in that official housing policy: preserving existing affordable housing and protecting current residents from displacement and protecting the environment. Neither of those are mentioned in the resolution. I imagine our consultant does not even know those are two of the three major goals of our city's official housing policy. So I would ask you, please, to add to the Be It Resolved section clear instructions to evaluate the impact of every policy option on the two of the city's three top housing objectives that directly relate to rent stabilization policy. And that would be preserving existing affordable housing and protecting current residents from displacement and protecting the environment. Please also instruct them under the Be It Resolved section to evaluate every potential policy change through a race equity lens, as the strategic plan repeatedly emphasizes should be done. And the one other thing I just want to point out is that your resolution does say the reason we're doing this review is because it's called for in the strategic plan. That's true, but please go back and look at the strategic plan and see that it's only called for under the preserving existing affordable housing. It's a strategy to try to preserve existing affordable housing. So shouldn't the rent stabilization review be focused on how do we preserve our existing affordable housing, which of course will protect people from displacement? Thank you so much. And it will also, by the way, it will also protect the environment. And so I would certainly appreciate a reference there to our climate framework as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments on voting items? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any virtual public comments on voting items? Okay, come on down. Come on down.
Mayor, there are no virtual public comments tonight at all.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Steve Ney from Ward 3, right? Used to be in Ward 2, but, okay, I was gerrymandered out. Okay. I'm going to address the rent stabilization issue, but I want to mention that the very strongly related issue is that I'm currently representing a tenant at the Essex House, and some of you I know may know about this because you're getting some of the emails. Miss Patience Allo is sitting here, and she's in the Essex House, which is not rent stabilized, but similar issues. And the apartment that she's in has now been condemned for the second time by this county because of repeated sewage leakages and leaks and mold issues. Okay, she's an example, in a way, of the need to preserve and improve our existing housing. And I want to say the city Devin McNally and his staff have been aware of it and have been helping. So we're grateful for, and also from the county inspectors and so forth. There's an effort to deal with this issue, but it's an example of some of the kind of worst things that can happen to a tenant when there's sewage leaking throughout and the place is condemned. And she's been moved to another apartment upstairs, much smaller apartment, but at least she has a place right now. But how many more months is this going to go on? And that brings me to your focus on your resolution tonight, which has as its first point, and I'm going to propose revising that first point, not eliminating it completely. It talks about capital improvement pathways. Well, I would propose revising that to, along the lines that Colleen suggested, preserve and improve the quality of existing housing and avoiding displacement of tenants, including the use of capital improvement pathways to help landlords. And we could even reference the fair return policy, which should be looked at as well. We talked about that before. Basically, it's a carrots and sticks approach that I've talked about a couple times on other evenings. For example, using the carrots, the housing reserve, the county green bank, state and local grants, and maybe there are other positive ways. Have I already used up my time? Oh, my God. And let's get a picture. I've talked about this before. Let's get a picture of what the housing is like in Tacoma Park, which are the troubled properties, and then track those troubled properties and adopt a new policy that would prevent landlords of those bad properties from getting increased rents until they fix them up. And again, I agree with using a racial equity lens for all the analysis. So that's a suggestion. I hope you can adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other comments on voting items?
Good evening. Paul Hubner, Ward 3. Tonight, the City Council will vote on a directive to RSG, the city's rent stabilization consultant, requesting further research and policy options. I want to fully support, as the vast majority of residents have, the proposal to not weaken the official city housing policy and goals, which are to preserve, produce, and protect our neighbors in rent-stabilized housing. RSG has already concluded in their report that our existing law has not stifled nor impeded any new development in our city. It is the other conditions of scarce land, expensive financing that have prevented such development. If scarce land is an important part of the problem, then to me, a logical place to look is the massive and soon-to-be available land on the old Adventist site. That has not been adequately addressed by the city's administration or a housing and community development staff. Most importantly, where's the report from the 13 members of HCD in our city government with their analysis that complies with the City Council's adopted resolution 2019-47 that requires the council, by force of law, to align with the 3 pillars of the Economic Development Strategic Plan: to preserve the existing affordable housing, to produce more housing across income spectrum, and to protect our current residents from displacement and discrimination while protecting the environment. Some on council are strongly advocating for an increase of the city's current exemption period from 5 to 15 years before rent stabilization is instituted. Some seem bent on more closely aligning our city rent stabilization program with the much less protective policies of the county government. The council has not addressed the need for such an aggressive approach to altering the law, except perhaps to raise more revenue, even at the expense of endangering the affordable homes of our rental neighbors. I have heard only one resident come before you come before you during public comments to advocate for any expansion of the 5-year time frame. Where are the other missing supporters who would stand with this misguided move to extend a moratorium on rent stabilization to 15 years? 15 years of raising rents without the limits imposed by rent stabilization, rather than the 5-year exemption limit, would significantly impact the already endangered number of affordable apartments. And I'd just like to I want to thank all of you for approving the grant for the Village Small Repairs Committee. I know I participate in that, but I mean, we already have a couple of jobs. There was a guy in my basement last night cutting some wood for a project. We're going to be back over there at your friend's house. And we were there with the mayor. The program's going well enough under Sandy and Emily. It's just really doing well. ARP made a grant, and we're just looking forward to meeting more people and having more fun. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments on voting items?
Good evening. Randy Gibson, Ward 3. Good to see you all. I didn't come with prepared remarks. I want to totally agree to and support my fellow residents in terms of their concerns, frankly, about weakening our rent stabilization. Last week, I came here talking about our democratic spirit here, our democratic civic spirit, where we had dozens of residents speaking on behalf of our city and taking pride. And I took pride in the fact that many folks came out, and it's not always easy to come out and speak to in this council. I noted there are some challenges to speak before this council. We only give 3 minutes. We often are not responded to. We often have to wait till the end of the evening for there to be any kind of discussion or vote on the subjects. We sometimes get lectured about what is the truth or what is the proper understanding. I'll just want to add one other challenge, which is the lack of information in a timely manner. The resolution that you're all voting on came out something like 8 hours ago. That's hard enough for you guys. It's harder for the public to be able to respond and to be engaged in a way that I think you want. I just went back to the RSG timeline. RSG proposes to deliver a data-driven and a data-informed and community-driven process review. And I question whether that's happening in terms of the impediments to actually being involved and for us to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other voting items? Comments on voting items? And we have no virtual comments. Do we have any public comments on general items? General public comments? Do we have any virtual general public comments? Okay. We're going to move to council comments. Do we have any council comments this evening? Councilmember Hanzat.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thank you to those of you who came out. I particularly want to welcome Ms. Allo. It's good to see you, and I know that you have been going through, you and your family have been going through a number of troubles. I appreciate you taking the time to sit in front of us today and work with Mr. Ney on these comments. It really means a lot to me that you're here because I know how precious your time is, and I know that you've been through a really horrible situation, and it continues and it persists, and I'm sorry. I also appreciate how very many people, and I hope you have felt that at least people have been trying within our means to do what we are capable of. And Mr. Ney, I particularly appreciate you stepping in the role that you're in, sounds like, because it's necessary. And that brings me to, I think, what I would like to share about, I'm not going to reiterate the things I've said about rent stabilization in the past, but some of my concerns. So Essex House, for those who aren't aware, is a LIHTC building. So in fact, it is not subject to the same rent stabilization, particular mechanisms that control for inflation in the same way as our other rental units across the city. And so it's not uncommon for Essex House residents to experience like a 6% increase in rents each year, which is a lot to absorb, actually. And there's a lot of confusion, and I think that is something that has come to the fore over the last several years. And our housing department is working very hard to address some of those kinds of miscommunication about rent stabilization issues, because it is hard to absorb in Essex House. And frankly, I find it unacceptable, completely and totally, that many residents, not just Ms. Allo, as I'm sure she knows, have had to experience conditions, living conditions, and maintenance issues, severe maintenance issues. And I don't just mean maintenance. Mold growing in your unit is not just a maintenance issue. It's your children's health. It's your health. It's chronic, and it affects you for life. And we have got to get to the underbelly of what's causing these issues. It is a multifaceted set of issues. I think everybody knows that. So, Mr. Ney, I welcome, and Ms. Allo, I welcome an in-depth conversation with you as the Ward 5 representative, and I imagine many of my colleagues would too, about what you're specifically experiencing and what specific issues you think in combination will help to address the kinds of infrastructure issues that we're looking at, the management, the enforcement. We know some of the issues, but there may be things that you're uncovering that we don't know about. And I think that would be very useful to inform the conversation, because where I sit right now, seeing all the issues across my ward, I am very eager to address some of those underbelly issues and figure out what more can we do. We've got a robust housing department. It is fully staffed. They are doing a really, really good job compared to honestly what I was experiencing about 3 years ago, not because we didn't have a great staff, but because we didn't have enough people. And that's really made a huge difference. And I really appreciate the fact that they have been working closely with you and with some of our other residents. And that brings me to a happier note. On Monday, Long Branch Main Street will be cutting the ribbon for the new Main Street. So the state housing, Mr. Help me out, Mayor, Mr. J. Oh my goodness, I'm having a blank. Our senior housing, our state housing. Jake Day, thank you, Jake Day. Jake Day will be here with us that day. Our county executive, who is a Tacoma Park resident and a Ward 5 resident, will also be at the Long Branch Main Street opening. And it's just a really exciting day. People have spent many years working towards this. So I hope you will revel in the excitement with all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Hunzak. Councilmember Landman.
I think Councilmember Westlake had her hand up for a while before I did. I didn't know if you noticed. I can see it.
I'm fine with deferring to the mayor's discretion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. It's hard to be absent. So first, I want to thank the people who spoke this evening about rent stabilization. And I appreciate your persistence in coming out week after week to raise the issues that you have raised. I think that they are indicative of a widely shared support throughout my ward, at least, for keeping the program strong. And I am eager to make it more effective with the changes that we are considering and not weaken it. So I just wanted to flag that. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., Ward 1 is having a call with the police department to share any concerns, especially from North Tacoma. So if you haven't already gotten a copy of the Zoom link to call into that call, please let me know. You can text or call me or email me, and I'll make sure that you get it. There will also be a coffee with the cop on July 14th in Ward 1. It'll be at the Spring Mill Bakery from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and followed by a coffee with your council member, or maybe you want to have a glass of water for that second session so you don't leave too over-caffeinated. And that will be from 11 to 12:30, also at Spring Mill Bakery. I hope to see some of you there. And for the residents of Grant Avenue who live right close to Spring Mill Bakery, we're still working to put together an opportunity for you and your neighbors at Edinburgh House to meet with MHP about the impending plans, and I'm working with the city manager to try and make that happen. And finally, I just wanted to mention that there's a Fix-It clinic coming up on the 11th, this Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. right here in the Tacoma Park Library. So bring your broken stuff and have it fixed for free by your neighbors. And finally, thank you to the Ward 1 residents who have stepped up to take positions with the council or with the city's committees, commissions, and boards. We really appreciate the time and effort that goes into those collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Landman. I'm going to go ahead and do Councilmember Schlegel, and then that way I can hit Councilmember Westlake, and then I think I will have everybody from the dais done. Councilmember Schlegel.
Thank you, Mayor Searcy, and thank you to everyone who commented this evening. I've been thinking a lot about the rent stabilization policy options, and in particular, the June 29th memorandum to the mayor and members of council from our Director of Housing and Community Development. That memo indicated that RSG had done additional research on market conditions, including conducting interviews with local developers, and that those interviewees suggested that longer exemption periods could reduce perceived investment risk by providing greater predictability for lenders, investors, and future purchasers, while shorter exemption periods could introduce additional uncertainty regarding future project revenues and asset values. It took me a few days to think about it, but I noted that the thought there is that people constructing new buildings in our area would be looking to sell them as quickly as possible, potentially, which kind of goes against, I feel like, a Tacoma Park value of being here for the long haul. The memo reminded me that we had asked as council for case studies back when the scope of this review was being proposed, and I hope that in the next phase we can we can get the kinds of case studies that will help us understand better these perspectives that we're hearing. And I hope that those will reflect tenants' perspectives as well. We should keep in mind that tenants also are looking for financial predictability. And in fact, the rent stabilization law, when it was established in the 1980s, was precisely geared to provide people with that predictability, to know what their rent would be year over year and how to plan accordingly. I think our current policies do provide a great deal of predictability for developers and property owners. We have generous property tax exemptions in place for new multifamily rental buildings. The county has expedited the approval process for buildings. Developers know they can adjust rents at market rates for the first 5 years. They have the guaranteed right to CPI-adjusted annual rent increases, the right to petition for fair return, and we all know that there's a widely utilized tool of a 30-year projected inflation rate that lenders and borrowers use, which is currently set today at 2.54% by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. So I don't really see the need to explore extending the exemption period, or for that matter, to look into the establishment of these floor and ceiling arrangements that could lead to rent increases above the CPI. And I will be advocating tonight for the resolution to emphasize the need to apply a racial equity lens, as well as the city's climate response framework. Just to quote a few statements from that 2017 resolution about racial equity. Issues of racial equity must be addressed proactively and deliberately in the course of decision-making. The City Council recognizes the need to examine seemingly neutral policies and practices. We need to update, eliminate, or create government policies, practices, and programs specifically to dismantle existing racial disparities. And the City Council acknowledges potential difficulties in assessing the impact of decisions on racial equity, but is committed to applying a racial equity lens in a systematic way in its decision-making processes. And as regards our climate emergency response framework, I'll just say, well, it really goes without saying that climate change itself is now acknowledged as a racial issue, with the worst impacts all over the world already being felt inordinately by people of color. Thank you.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to say really quickly that the Manna Food Drive is scheduled for July 13th, sometime in the afternoon. I unfortunately won't be able to be there to assist former Councilmember Siemens this time, so I'm really hopeful that we'll have enough volunteers. Again, July 13th, that's a Monday. And again, I'll make a plea for anyone who has a pickup truck or a van that can assist. It's a heavy lift, and I'm really regretting that I won't be able to be there to help Terry and Joyce out. So hopefully we'll have some volunteers on that day. I want to say thank you to Director McNally and the Housing Community Development staff, his assistant, Ms. Arroyo Lefebvre, for not only the work they've been doing apparently at 47's Maple Essex House, and I'm truly sorry to hear about the circumstances that you're living in there, but there's a building directly across the street that's in bad condition as well, that has been having air conditioning issues, and it was made known to us 2 days ago that they had been without air throughout the weekend, and we all know how hot it was. So grateful to staff for getting out there and assessing and getting inspectors out. Thank you, Mayor Searcy, for coming out with me as we assessed and spoke with residents and worked hard to get the management there to place a couple of residents whose units were condemned. So that just, again, I appreciate all the comments about rent stabilization review and all the care and concern expressed by so many of you who come every week, and I appreciate the conversations. But we really need to make some ground with this. I'm not sure really what this resolution is going to do, and it's been weighing heavily on my mind trying to figure out, exactly how it should be worded and how much staff is going to take it as direction. And I'm hopeful that some of the things that I've mentioned in regards to being able to preserve our affordable housing will be taken seriously, one of which is TOPL, and hopefully we'll have some conversation about that, tenant opportunity to purchase law, and the condo conversions, and the number of units we've seen deteriorate or diminished due to condo conversion, and the decreasing numbers of our affordable housing units over the past 10, 15 years or so. So hopefully some of whatever's in here will allow our staff to direct their attention to that. Because as I said before, without affordable housing stock, what good is a good rent stabilization policy? So, but I'll stop there. I want to apologize publicly to you, Mr. Gagliardo. I know we were supposed to meet and have a conversation, and I always appreciate our talks. But you know, all the comments are thought-provoking, and I'm taking this very seriously, and hopefully we'll have a decent outcome for the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilbert. Councilmember Westlake.
Thank you. Apologies, it's the second week in a row I'm not there in person. The plan is to be there in person next week. Looking forward to that, but have been able to listen and participate through all of tonight. I just wanted to share, I do want to quickly say that I'm still waiting for names on the Community Vision petition. Still have not gotten it, unless I missed it. I wanted to just share a little bit of my headspace going into the rent stabilization discussion, voting on the resolution tonight. I said some of this in our meeting last week, but to me, what we are doing right now is one step in a very large process. And the step that we're doing right now is saying, here's these things we want more information on. And that's what we're saying. We're not saying we will change those things or we won't. We're not saying by how much or which direction. We are saying these are things I want more data before I can make the decisions. That's how I am looking at it. That we were given a list of 9 policy choices and trade-offs that we wanted more information on, and we're saying here's the ones we want more information on. So I feel like sometimes that framework against other ones, it doesn't match up because, for example, getting more information about the capital improvement pathways is that's one of the tools. And I want that information to see how effective it could be for helping to preserve the affordable housing that we have, which is something that we all agree that is something of importance. So it's not that picking one means we're not caring about other things. This is just, I want the information so that at the end of this process, we are voting on an array that we hope and will tweak and set all the things in the right way so that we are meeting our overall goals. So I just wanted to say that a bit more plainly, so that folks know that's where my head is at. I'm gathering information. So I'm not really saying no to any information to help us on these policymaking decisions that we will be making in the future. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Westlake. And so I want to start with thanking our 4th of July organizers. Tara Egan, I know it was an extremely difficult decision for you to make. We've never canceled our 4th of July parade, but she made the right call, and her notice that went out handled the situation with grace and with forethought in prioritizing the safety of our residents and our staff and parade participants. So I do want to say thank you very much to the organizers of the 4th of July parade for making the right call this weekend. It was brutal day, and the fact that they were able to make sure that we were able to protect people in the community. I also want to thank the organizers of the Long Branch Potluck on the 4th of July. had an opportunity to meet up with residents there, so definitely appreciate the organizers for inviting me out. Ms. Allo, I've been tracking your case, and I am so sorry that you are continuing to experience these difficulties. For those that are not aware, as Councilmember Honzak mentioned, Essex House is a deed restricted building. It's a LIHTC building. So it doesn't fall under our rent stabilization laws. It has a lot of county requirements and oversight, but our HCD staff are doing their part. But it is true that building needs a ton of work. The sewer backup is just one of a line of many other things that building needs. It has gone without air, without water, without heat. It has been a really difficult situation for families like yours, and your children, your beautiful children, should not be subjected to this. So my sincere apologies to you, and thank you, Steve, for supporting her in this effort. And we will continue to do our part. I know I've been tracking the issue. Our HCD staff has been tracking the issue. Also, Delegate Lord Charkoudian has been tracking the issue. We're really trying to help to move the needle forward. But it has been a process that should not take as long as it has taken. Also want to thank Councilmember Gilbert, again, as he mentioned, the work that he and I were doing in working with the residents, the tenants at the Maple View in terms of the air conditioning that went out in that building. We are still engaging with residents that have been impacted. We know that some have been able to return to their homes as of today, but there are still some others that have some units that have been condemned. So we're continuing to work with property management, our HCD staff, and our county inspectors to try to get those properties up back online as well. Also want to, okay. Also want to state that I will be attending the Long Branch Main Street ribbon cutting, so I'm looking forward to that. Also, I want to give a congratulations. There was a student podcast challenge on how young people feel about American identity on the nation's 250th birthday. And winners of this student contest. The title was Abridged, and it's students Grace Kalpa and Angelica Garrett from Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring. And they are high schoolers that live in Tacoma Park. And one of the handful of cities in the U.S. that allow 16-year-olds to vote in all local elections. And in their podcast, her friend, and they discussed the power of the youth vote and how voting rights encourage residents to learn about the government and be more politically active in their communities. And I am so excited. They interviewed me as part of that podcast. So I am super excited that they won. So they were listed as part of the winners for the NPR Student Podcast Challenge. So super excited about that. Also, just want to make folks aware, there has been, Montgomery County has issued information today is in a news release on launching a reporting portal to assist tracking immigration enforcement activity in the community. So we will make sure that we work with our staff to make sure that the link to the county reporting, the portal is one of two tools that was called for as part of the two county laws enacted, the Unmasked ICE Act and the County Values Act. And so there's a portal that if you see ICE or see law enforcement wearing masks, you can report that. Also, if you see in any kind of ICE activities, including in county parking lots and garages, that information can be shared through that portal. we have confirmed, or I have confirmed with the county, that municipalities are included in that reporting system. In fact, the goal is to make sure that all municipalities and the unincorporated county residents are aware of the portal and reporting things to the portal, and data from that portal will be shared with impacted municipalities. So I do just want to make sure that folks are aware, because that was released today, and we're able to this morning receive a briefing from the county staff on this new portal, which we're super excited has gone live. And then lastly, I do, again, want to thank all of the residents that have come out to provide information and your thoughts regarding rent stabilization. I think one of the things that is really important is the fact that the city has been working on a number of different policy issues regarding our housing. I think sometimes we can pigeonhole ourselves by not completely understanding the purpose of each of the different lanes in which we're doing work and how they intersect and interact with one another. So for example, our Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan was developed back in 2019. The Rent Stabilization Law Review was included as part of the Protect Affordable Housing. But many of the other components that we are talking about today was addressed as was presented during my presentation, and other strategies that were called out in the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan as well. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan is one piece, but the city staff has worked with the council and presented to the council for a couple of years now on mechanisms that we can use to actually evaluate the impact of our various housing policies and how they may pull things into different components of our evaluation pillars, so stability, quality, and choice. And so those options were not just limited to the rent stabilization law. It included in some of the presentations that staff provided to council a couple years back, included things like some of our other policies, like our tenant protections, our housing reserve fund, a number of the other policies, our pilots, our payment in lieu of taxes. And my colleague brought that up. We have these new tax incentives where they were developed as part of the broader strategy that was outlined in the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, which said we needed to look at how our tax structure could help incentivize housing creation. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to stress that where we are right now, and the goal of what we're trying to do is to identify what are some of the things that would help us to better understand policy levers that we may be able to pull and what the potential impacts of those would be. And that would include best practices from other communities, other examples of what other communities have done in these areas that this council or future councils may choose to adopt. It may include understanding what some of the negative externalities are associated more with some of the things that are in place. And I think all of those things are important. And I don't think that us deciding to do that additional legwork somehow means that we are against rent stabilization or not for moving the needle forward. We've just spent a large chunk of this meeting talking about problems that we have in our multifamily buildings. Right now, we don't have anywhere to put them. If these families wanted to move into another unit somewhere, I struggle to find additional places for people. And so I think it is important for us to make sure that when we are working through what are some of the things that we need to make sure that we're addressing, it includes not just this particular policy, but also how can we make sure that we're thinking about our laws, our policies, and how they may intersect and ultimately result in longer term improvements to our community. And so with that, just want to make sure Councilmember DeBala is almost here. Yes. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to City Manager DeSpirito to go through City Manager comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, the council, and to all our guests and residents. From the Police Department, Tacoma Park Police and Inova Blood Donor Services are once again teaming up to host a Tacoma Community Blood Drive on Saturday, July 11th, between 11:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Your selfless act of donating blood can help save lives, and it only takes a short amount of time. Let's come together as a community to positively impact the health and well-being of those in need. Register today. A link will be included tomorrow in the posted City Manager comments. We hope to see you at the Tacoma Park Community Center, 7500 Maple Avenue, Azalea Room, 2nd floor. Save the date. National Night Out is scheduled for Tuesday, August 4th. There will be games, bounce houses, face painting, and giveaways, so plan to stop by and have some fun. This will be from 6 to 9 p.m. in front of the Piney Branch Elementary School at 7510 Maple Avenue. From the Recreation Department, summer is off to a fantastic start for our senior programs. Despite the recent heat and rainy weather, the senior room continues to be filled with energy, connection, and activity. Last week, 12 participants enjoyed bingo, 8 joined us for Loteria, and our Knit and Crochet Club welcomed nearly 20 participants for a full house. Several of our fitness and wellness classes have already reached capacity, including hip hop with 20 participants, Tai Chi with 24, yoga for healthy aging with 16, and line dance with an impressive 56 participants. Other popular classes are filling quickly, with foundational fitness at 30 of 45 spots filled, rhythmic drumming at 19 out of 20 spots, and Zumba Gold at 21 participants. Looking ahead, our August offerings are generating tremendous interest. Pickleball camp is completely full, with all 8 spaces claimed, and our August trip to the Montgomery County Agricultural Fair is nearly sold out, with only 6 of the 20 available spaces remaining. It's wonderful to see so many older adults staying active, building friendships, and taking advantage of the diverse recreational opportunities offered by this city. Please be advised that the Lee Jordan Field will be closed for renovations from July 20th through August 21st. And Ed Wilhelm Field will be closed for renovations from July 27th through August 21st. During this period, the fields will be inaccessible to the public to ensure the safety of all visitors and to allow for the necessary improvements to occur. We appreciate your understanding and cooperation as we work to enhance these community spaces. Regular use of the fields will resume on August 24th, weather and construction progress permitting. If you have any questions or would like additional information, please contact John Webster at 240-687-2202. From the City Clerk's office, the city's Board of Elections and Ethics Commission will host an information session for prospective candidates and treasurers on Thursday, July 16th at 7 p.m. in the Community Center Hydrangea Room. Attendance by Zoom is an option. This session is designed for residents who are considering becoming a candidate for the upcoming 2026 city election and would like to learn more about what is involved in running for office. Additional information is available on the city website or by contacting the city clerk. And finally, from the city manager's office, a staff shout out this week is from our recreation department. As our summer recreation season gets underway, we'd like to recognize and thank all of our program department camp staff. The first week of camp is always one of the busiest times of the year, with our facilities buzzing with energy as children and families celebrate the start of summer. A special thank you goes out to every camp leader, counselor, support staff member, front desk team, and behind-the-scenes employee who works together to create a welcoming, inclusive, and safe environment for our campers. Your dedication, patience, and enthusiasm make it possible for hundreds of young people to enjoy meaningful experiences filled with learning, friendship, recreation, and personal growth. Thank you for everything that you do to make our summer camps a place where our community's youth can thrive. Your hard work is truly appreciated and does not go unnoticed. And that concludes my report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we're going to move to our voting session this evening. The first item is the first reading ordinance amending Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 8.824, Police Employees Retirement Plan to adjust the participant contribution amount and normal retirement benefits. Would someone like to move it?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Landman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Any points of discussion on this one? Okay, hearing none, I just want to check to see if Councilmember DeBala has joined. Okay, she's still on the bus, so we're going to keep this thing moving. All right. So with that,
Mayor.
with the, I'm sorry.
Can I make a quick point of order regarding this, this next vote? This is regarding future retirees, not former retirees, and I think most of the community know that I'm a former retiree, so I'm good on this one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Gilbert, for confirming. All right. Seeing no more additional lights, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Landman,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala, Councilmember Schlegel,
Yes.
Councilmember Gilbert,
Yes.
Councilmember Honzak,
Yes.
Councilmember Wesselek,
Aye.
Mayor Cersey.
Aye. Okay, the next item, I want to make sure that we're able to, let's do the consent agenda first, because I know that we have some modifications, and I know that Councilmember DeBala is in transit. So for the consent agenda, just as a reminder, items on the consent agenda are voted on with one motion unless a council member requests an item to be pulled for individual discussion and vote. So with,
Mayor?
yes,
I'm sorry.
go right ahead.
A question came up about one of the appointments that, and I don't know if it's resolved yet, and so I'm wondering if two of the resolutions could be pulled.
Correct. Yep, we talked about that. So what we're going to do is move the consent, and then the working committee will request for it to be, those impacted committees to be pulled. Okay. So would someone like to move the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilbert. Do we have any requests or modification? Motion to pull.
Yeah, we have a motion to pull appointments for Grants Review Committee and Recreation Committee so that we can, so the committee can further discuss appointments for a few applicants that we overlooked.
Okay, great. So there's a motion on the floor by Councilmember Gilbert to table the discussion for committee, the Grants Review Committee and the Rec Committee until the working group has an opportunity to review additional modifications. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Any points of discussion on this before the vote? Okay. All those in favor of Councilmember Gilbert's motion to table item F and G from the consent agenda to be brought back to the council at a later time, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Do we have any opposed? Any abstain? All right, so now on the floor is the amended consent agenda, which includes all of the items except for F and G, appointments to the Grants Review Committee and appointments to the Recreation Committee. Are there any additional points of discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, and given that we are in a hybrid situation, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Landman,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala, Councilmember Schlegel,
Yes.
Councilmember Gilbert,
Yes.
Councilmember Honzak,
Yes.
Councilmember Wesselek,
Aye.
Mayor Cersey.
Aye. Okay, the next item that we have this evening is the voting item resolution providing direction to the consultant and staff regarding the rent stabilization policy review. Would someone, oh, actually, I do want to just do a quick introduction of the item before we move into discussion. Just want to make sure I have it. All right. Okay. All right. I want to thank all of my colleagues for providing feedback regarding the resolution. I do want to just make sure for those at home who may be tracking this, a summary of the edits that were made. Let's see. All right. Okay. So we did receive, based on some of the comments that were shared during our work session last week, there was a desire to make sure that there was some clarification between what was noted in terms of the goals of the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan document, and that framework of preserve, protect, produce, and our housing policy review framework, which includes the stability, quality, and choice, and also our June 10th cover memo also identified goals regarding the rent stabilization review. So because of these three different concepts, we wanted to make sure, or at least I wanted to make sure that for those reading, that it was clear what we were really addressing. And so therefore, we stuck to language that related specifically to the rent stabilization policy review. The second whereas clause was later in the document. It was moved up to make it, to specifically call out the language from the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. We also re-highlighted language that's available publicly on the city's webpage, as well as in some of the initial documents regarding this review in terms of what the purpose of the review is. It not only provides clarification around the goals of the review, but also provides some insight in terms of the methodologies that will be used. So there is a fourth whereas that says the review will, one, examine best practices with rent stabilization around the country in balancing tenant protections, incentivizing high-quality housing, addressing affordability, and creating housing choice. And for those colleagues that wanted to make sure that we were not giving the impression that we were abandoning the housing policy review framework that staff had presented to this council multiple times, it was clear that that first objective of the policy review included those words. And then the item number 2, the review will engage with tenants and landlords to understand where the current policies may need modifications, supplemented by data from sources such as the city and the county. And 3, provide recommendations for policy modifications based on best practices and addressing the concerns discovered through the analysis of data and engagement with landlords and tenants. So that fourth whereas is simply a lift of the language that was included on our city webpage regarding the study, as well as earlier language that the council used regarding the scope. There was also discussions that were raised during our work session last week around the policy options that council agreed to move forward. We were told that we could go 6 was the max, but wanted to note the items that were noted by by council members. We also made sure, I know that there's some mention tonight of tinkering around with the wording in the list of the items that were identified by the council. As was noted in the feedback, the goal was to stay true to the language that was used by the consultant to ensure, because the purpose of this document is to provide them with guidance on what we want them to focus on. And so we tried to stay true to the language that was consistent with the June 10th slide deck that the consultants gave. And so what we ultimately decided on was capital improvement pathways, utility transfers, rich ceilings and floors, exemptions, unit-based exemptions, deed-restricted units, exemption, new construction. For those items that, where there was a majority of council members that requested additional information, it was the capital improvement pathways, the exemptions, deed-restricted units, as well as the exemptions, new construction. There was also a request for some language that would, again, reinforce some of the administrative aspects of the preliminary findings from the consultant. So there was a second resolve clause added. This was made a separate resolve because these are functions of staff, not necessarily the consultant. And so we didn't want there to be confusion that we were asking the consultant to spend time on administrative functions that would typically fall within our staff's purview. So that second resolve recognizes issues such as program administration, educational materials, outreach, and improved clarity around requirements and processes for tenants and landlords are important, but also acknowledge that it is up to, it is something that we are directing staff, not necessarily RSG, to do. There was also a request to include language directing the review of the policy options in relation to the multiple city strategic documents, such as the Climate Emergency Declaration, the Climate Action Plan, and the city's Racial Equity Framework. The council can make a decision to add it, but I just want to make sure that people understand my rationale. My concern is, given the number of the existing plans and frameworks, I thought that adding this requirement would increase the work of the contractors, and was concerned about them going over budget and time, especially because they would be reviewing the max number of policy options and trade-offs, and underneath each of those could potentially be multiple approaches that they would like for us to consider as a council. So to then ask them to evaluate all of those various options based on all of these strategic documents that the city has put in place, and quite frankly, hasn't looked at in a minute to determine whether or not these are goals and things we want to continue to keep, would just seem like extra work. In my view, it makes sense for us to whittle down things a bit in terms of which policy options we want to actually turn into a policy action by this council, and then require there to be additional analysis based on that smaller set. With that, I just want to check to make sure there are no additional questions regarding the modifications that were made before we move it for discussion on the vote. Councilmember Landman.
Yes, so you mentioned wanting to track the language used by the consultants, and they referred to capital improvement petition pathways. I'd like to suggest we put the word petition back in, because I think it also, besides being their language, it also, I believe it was in their initial list, maybe not on both of their lists, but on their list, one of them, because it brings back in the language that alludes back to the fact that this includes fair return petitions, in the concept that it's about capital from a variety of sources, including fair return petitions. So if you could put that back in, I think that would make sense. And then in terms of tracking their language and the very simple language where it says exemptions, new construction, there are going to be newly constructed buildings that are deed restricted and are not market rate when they come online. And I don't think it's clear to me, at least, whether what we are trying to encompass with that is only new constructed market rate buildings, or also the other ones. We have these buildings that start out deed restricted, and then it becomes highly complicated if some of the units do not fall under the deed restrictions, but fall under MPDU or other restrictions. So if you can address that, I had made a suggestion for language to clarify where we are
That
on
was
that.
addressed in that we are including exemptions, deed restricted units. So we would be.
Whether new construction or otherwise, because you've got new construction under a separate category.
Correct.
Which is why deed restricted units in existing buildings pose one kind of a challenge, and deed restricted units in buildings that are partly deed restricted and partly might be, that's what I'm trying to get at. Are we intending to cover all of the bases there?
Yeah, so I mean, if your question is about if we were to essentially change some of the exemption rules around, let's call it, units that are considered market rate in deed restricted buildings, we could certainly have a conversation about how that would interact in a newly created deed restricted building, in which they would, would they fall under the 15 years? Probably, but that would be, or 5 years. The idea being that we would look at all of those things. I think that the point is that these are the general areas. We understand that there are going to be some overlapping pieces. For example, utility transfers have some overlap with capital improvement pathways, but they all are also separate in some cases.
And Director McNally, it might be helpful for folks to understand how, if you could briefly explain how a property can ultimately end up with a deed restricted designation, and how a lot of that relates to financing that occurs as folks are trying to pull the money together for housing creation.
Yeah, so there's a few different methods. The most common method is through an allocation through what's called the low-income housing tax credit. So that's equity investment in exchange for tax credits at a very high level. And then there are kind of local dollars that sometimes come into play through either the state or the county, that might be in the form of loans, grants, or some other agreement or arrangement. In every case, there are specific requirements. In particular, with LIHTC, it has to do with the affordability level, and then that governs how deep or how generous the subsidy is. And so for most affordable housing agencies, they are looking at kind of the amount of subsidy being based on the number of affordable units and that level of affordability. So the more affordable the unit is, we typically use area median income for families. So if it is available for what's called a 30% area median income household, so that would be considered extremely low income, that is a deeper subsidy that's going to come from that agency than for something that's closer to 50 or 60% AMI, which is still low income.
Great, thank you very much. And I just want to, because Councilmember Landman, you are talking about specific modifications to the resolution, but it hasn't been moved yet. So if there are questions that are not just related to what's here, but if you're requesting modifications, Councilmember Schlegel, are you requesting modifications?
Modifications to the language?
To the language.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so let's move the resolution. Would someone like to move the resolution providing direction to staff and the consultant regarding the rent stabilization policy review?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Okay. All right, so Councilmember Schlegel, you're up.
Okay, I did have one, since it had already come up, a follow-on question for Director McNally, which is when buildings have loans or subsidies or grants that set up deed-restricted arrangements, are there sunsets to those arrangements, after which time the building owners could revert units to being market rate?
Yes. So there are typically affordability arrangements. They can range anywhere from 30 to 55 years, generally speaking. It depends on kind of what it is. LIHTC has a 15-year kind of like compliance period, and then an additional 15 years of kind of affordability. After that year 15, you can also recapitalize, so go back, ask for money to do upgrades. But yes, the period of affordability typically has a sunset date.
Thank you. And so I would very much like to, I'm very cognizant of the point that you have made several times, Councilmember Gilbert, about the stock, the inventory of affordable housing. And so if we are including exemptions, deed restricted, would that include looking at the eventual sunsetting of any obligation to have affordable housing, and whether at that point the city's rent stabilization rules would apply?
That currently exists today. So for any affordable housing complex, the exemption period is to the date of when it would roll out of the affordability exemption. So typically what you see with most affordable housing projects, they are then going back and saying, hey, please give us more money for additional years of affordability. But in the case in which an affordable housing complex were to exit their affordability regulatory agreement under our current law today, they would then become subject to our rent stabilization ordinance.
So just to drill down a bit further, if I had a building and I had a 40% NPDU, 40% median income unit, at the end of the agreement providing for that unit, would rent stabilization apply to that rent that had just been charged, or would it snap to some sort of market position?
So for the year that it's rolling into the program, so let's say the market rent at that rate, or the rate the rent was $1,000. Apologies, it's been a long day. If it was $1,000, then it could be $1,000 plus whatever that CPI allowance was. So there wouldn't be any sort of adjustment that they could go to. They would just simply roll in.
Okay, thank you. All right, so moving to a couple of language suggestions for the draft resolution. One relates to what we were just discussing in the fourth whereas. It says, whereas the review will, 1, examine best practices with rent stabilization around the country in balancing tenant protection, incentivizing high-quality housing, addressing affordability, and creating housing choice. There are 4 items there, and I would like to recommend, in light of Councilmember Gilbert's comments, a 5th, which would be maintaining or increasing the stock or inventory of affordable rental housing.
I will say, with all due respect, Councilmember Schlegel, because this language is coming from the scope of the review, I am not inclined to consider this a friendly amendment. If you feel passionately about it, we can call a vote on it.
I would like to move that we call a vote on it. Yeah.
Okay. So Councilmember Schlegel would like to add, can you repeat the language that you would like to add?
In the fourth whereas, the third line, I'd like to drop and then following housing choice, put a comma and say, and maintaining or increasing the stock of affordable rental housing. And while I recognize what you just said, Mayor Searcy, about the defined scope of the review, I don't think that this is at odds with that, because it it is focusing on the long-term stability of our inventory, which I think has always been a given in here, but I would like to see it named explicitly.
And Councilmember Schlegel, I just want to make sure that addressing affordability is not duplicative.
Yes, I thought about that. I think that affordability doesn't necessarily imply numbers of affordable units. It implies that there are affordable units. And so I think that my additional suggested language would imply that an inventory, an ongoing inventory of how many units are affordable would be an important piece.
Director McNally, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so I want to talk very quickly about kind of some of the preservation work we are doing. So one of the kind of biggest ways that we can preserve units' affordability for the long term and also help stabilize them is putting them into the hands of affordable housing providers who are in there for the long term. And so two recent examples of this that come to mind is one is if people knew of the Hillwood Manor apartment complex up on New Hampshire Avenue. That was 96 units in particularly rough shape. And the city worked with the county to get it into the hands of MHP, who did a substantial renovation there. And now it's all affordable housing with a regulatory agreement. Similarly, we worked with the tenant association at 7520 Maple, the Duville, and they signed a development agreement with Orlo Property Management with the help from county funding to also put that under a regulatory agreement. There's also work collaborating with the county to help steer funds to renovate existing affordable housing. So I'll talk about Parkview Towers, which is currently in the middle of its renovation, and then Hampshire Towers as well, which is, fingers crossed, wrapping up its renovation, which has been a very long road. So there's lots of pieces that we do along that, and we are always kind of taking an eye out for the properties that are kind of coming up on their expiration date and saying, hey, what's your recapitalization strategy? Where are you going from here? I think in terms of kind of that sort of work, it certainly is ongoing, continuing. It just, the reason why we don't mention it in relation to rent stabilization is all of these are deed restricted units.
I fully understand that, and I'm so happy, and I applaud the commitment of the city and of staff to all of those efforts to maintain, or even in the case of the Grace United Methodist Project, potentially add affordable housing. Here we're looking at potential policy changes to the RSO, and I feel that we need to guard against potential unknowns, find potential unknowns that could have an insidious impact over time, despite the city's commitments and despite the trust that we all have in the city to be trying to make affordable housing stay and happen. Could there be elements in policies that are under consideration by RSG? Could there be elements that over time could erode, say, the interest of these kinds of partners in owning and managing, or the ability of these kinds of partners to own and manage affordable properties in the city? So it's not questioning that we have the commitment, but it's saying, shouldn't we be vigilant? Shouldn't we spell out that we want to be vigilant about how rent stabilization ordinance changes could affect inventory over the long term?
And I think that would be a question when we're talking about the exemption for deed restricted units. I have no doubt that affordable housing providers will weigh in on that and find a way to make their voices heard. I think the broader piece about preserving housing, like with any policy, like our housing toolbox has got a lot of tools in it, and we're working to change and modify those tools kind of daily. And It's a never-ending process. But I think for the purposes of this piece, we're trying to focus on one tool in particular.
Thank you, Mr. McNally. Councilmember DeBala, I saw your hand a couple of times. I just wanted to check to see whether or not you wanted to speak. Let's see if she's frozen. I think. Oh.
Thank you. I first of all just wanted to let the rest of the council know that I did finally get online, but I have been listening since the committee appointments. And as far as the suggestion that Councilmember Schlegel has made in terms of adding language to this particular resolution at this point in time, acknowledging the point overall, but as I understand it, what we have in front of us describes what's in the scope of work for the contractor. So it seems to me that adding it here is not appropriate at all. If I'm right about where this language came from. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Schlegel, is that an old light? Councilmember Honzak.
I guess I'm probably just echoing Councilmember DeBala. I appreciate the desire to clarify at some stage of the discussion that there may be, very likely is, a desire to maintain and increase our housing stock. But I too think that this whereas clause says the review will, and the review has a particular outline, and this is the language from the review. So it would be almost misleading to add in language here. And also, frankly speaking, I think the intention that I hear, Councilmember Schlegel, is we're talking about the next step that we take with the data that we receive, which would be to look at maintaining and increasing stock, which I feel is part of our housing strategy right now as well. But if the council so willed it, I think it would fall in a resolved clause at a different moment in time.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Councilmember Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate you supporting my thoughts there, Councilmember Schlegel. And I love the language. However, I also have the question as to, if not here, where in this resolution you would see Director McNally, where there's direction for what I clearly think would have a great impact on our ability to maintain affordable housing stock, which is to address our ability to control condo conversions and allow council to have final say in TOPL processes where there's threat that we could go below, and whatever threshold, and I'm not sure if you've had conversation, or RSG has had conversation about what that threshold would be, but should we have a threat that we would go below what we would want for our affordable housing stock, giving council the authority to step in and say, hey, we can't condo convert here unless we've exhausted all of our options to have an affordable housing developer come in. And then should we not have anyone that wants to buy a property to develop it for affordable housing, then the tenants can purchase or it can be converted.
So I just want to jump in really quickly before Director McNally. I want to draw everyone's attention to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth whereas clause that states, in addition to this review, the city of Tacoma Park is also reviewing its housing policies and tools to better address the evolving needs of its residents, including tenant protections, housing reserve policy, payment in lieu of taxes policies, and. So that section was developed for the purpose of acknowledging that there are other policies and work that the city and the council is doing to try to address the needs of residents in our housing market. And so, Councilmember Gilbert, I'm going to turn things back over to Director McNally to speak. But if there's something there from what you've highlighted that's missing, but I would like for us to stay focused on the item at hand, which is Councilmember Schlegel's language, maintaining and increasing the stock of affordable housing to the 1, 2, 3, 4th whereas clause. And so that way we can go ahead and vote on that. And if it doesn't get the necessary votes, then we can move on to other modifications.
Mayor Cersei, my proposal for where to place that language is not as important as wanting the language. So if it would satisfy colleagues to have it in as an additional resolved, that would be fine with me. I don't know how to craft that right now. To your point, I don't think that the whereas number 5 really gets to inventory, the question of inventory or stock in any way.
A point of information on that, on the question, based on your reminding us that there is that other paragraph. That lists areas that we are already working on in other contexts, such as tenant protections, et cetera, the ones that are listed there. And I think, returning to Councilmember Gilbert's question, is in fact condo conversion prevention or excessive condo conversion prevention one of the things we're already working on? Because if not, it shouldn't be
So let's
listed
get back to Director McNally.
Yeah, so I know we've had conversations about this, and we're working on a memo. We need to kind of put the final touches on it that kind of addresses this very directly and talks about next steps for that. There are some pieces around kind of the legal questions of like, how can we put a cap? That I'll draw kind of a parallel, but it's not quite the same, of like adequate public facilities. The idea being that you're kind of setting a like threshold requirement. And how does that play out, and what would be the process by which anything that would take us below a threshold would be adjudicated? So the answer is it's on the work plan for this fiscal year, and we have some next steps that I promise we are sharing shortly. The memo is mostly drafted, but yes, we are going to be looking at condo conversions.
Director McNally promises, I'm good.
Okay, so Councilmember Gilbert, you are not requesting any additional edits at this time?
I am not at this time.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Honzak.
I have a question either for the mayor or for council or for Director McNally. If a resident or a council member, such as my fellow council member Gilbert, were looking through the various documents that currently exist within the city, including the housing strategy, would the words increasing our housing stock appear in one of those documents? Can anyone answer that right off the top of their head? I guess, I mean, it's a very important question. Condo conversions to me is a subset of that question. I personally philosophically believe that a key feature of what I, as a council member, am trying to drive towards is seeing some increase in our stock while maintaining some of the things. So I think it's important that we're lucid about that, because some of us may have a different direction of travel and whatnot. But as a city, I mean, can you just clarify? And if you can't, that's fine too. But I guess I just feel like this is sort of symbolic language in a way, and it's like, well, are we or are we not, and is it documented, or do we need to create a document that says that, or talk about it?
The Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan has 3 Ps associated. And I will try to list them in order, but I can't remember the exact order. It's preserve, produce, protect. So produce units, and I believe the language has something to do with, kind of meeting the needs of all residents, very broad language. But yes, producing units is part of the strategic plan. There are specific action items associated with all of these. Part of the reason why we talked about the framework is that all of them are great goals, All of them have some tensions involved between them because producing more units impacts, kind of questions about quality and stability and similar pushing on any of those. And so that was how we came up with the framework, which is more just kind of thinking discreetly as we move through, I'm going to call it the work plan that was assigned to HCD with the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. And that was probably way too much information.
I will say, Councilmember Hanzak, I know you had a conflict last week, but during the presentation last week that I developed, there's a slide that outlines the strategic plan objectives that related to choice. So 2.1A, encourage and facilitate the creation and expansion of housing types that are underrepresented in Tacoma Park is a strategic plan objective that was listed in the document. So I want us to get back to the question at hand, which is Councilmember Schlegel has made a motion to add to the 1, 2, 3, 4th whereas clause on the third line and maintaining and increasing the stock of affordable housing. It was Councilmember Schlegel made the motion. I'm sorry, I did not catch who seconded. Did someone second that motion? Councilmember Landman seconded. I would like to call the vote on adding this language to this particular whereas. All those in favor of...
Mayor Cersei, may I make one more comment in favor of the motion?
We've discussed the motion and your desire for the motion. At this point right now, we really do need to vote on the item. It's on the table. So with that, all those in favor of Councilmember Schlegel's motion to add to the 1, 2, 3, 4th whereas clause in the third line at the end of choice and maintaining and increasing the stock of affordable housing. Given that we're a hybrid, would the clerk please call a roll?
Councilmember Landman. Councilmember DeBala.
No.
Councilmember Schlegel.
Yes.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Yes.
Councilmember Hanzak.
No?
Councilmember Wesselek.
No.
Mayor Searcy.
No. Okay, so that item is off the table. Are there any other points of discussion on the resolution? Councilmember, hold on, I'm trying to see who was first. Councilmember Schlegel, is that an old light?
This is a new light, but I will defer to someone else for now, if you'd like.
Okay, let's get somebody else. Councilmember DeBala.
Thank you. I just wanted to address another issue that that has come up in this discussion about amending the resolution. I just looked back while we were talking at the February 2026 tenant protections ordinance, presentation. And in the presentation, it lists 7 things that the city staff is going to look into and that the council heard and the public heard them say. And number 6 has to do with condo conversions and restrictions on it and protection for tenants for it. So just to answer the question that came up about whether we know what the tenant protections are that the city staff is looking at, we do, because we have this presentation from February that lists all 7 of them. Just thought I'd point that out to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Landman.
This is a point of inquiry. Are you going to, have you treated the word petition under capital improvement petition pathways as a friendly amendment that you are adding?
I will say, I really wanted to stick to, I know where you might have pulled that from the last page of the report, but my read of that section was that these were just general groupings of topics that would be discussed with the council, and the discussion occurred during the presentation, and I thought that we had discussed during the council meeting last week that we were going to stay true to the language that was in the presentation, not the language that was in that summary at the end of the data report. So if you would like to move it, you can.
I would like to move it, and I would like to revert to that very conversation, because my understanding was we talked about how program where does the fair return petition pathway fall? Does it fall within the program administration issues, which were really about things like public education, et cetera, and you have now created a separate resolve clause on that? Or does it fall within the capital improvement pathways? And if it is not in program administration, but is indeed there, that is one of the things we've identified as the most important to improve the lives of landlords and tenants. So I want to make sure that it is accounted for the petitioning process. So is it in program administration, or is it in capital improvement?
Director McNally, I believe this was discussed last week, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so we would be, if we're talking about capital improvement pathways, we're looking at the fair return petition, because that includes both operating and capital expenses.
And in terms of the program administration, what I recall from the report was that there was mention of the need for just overall ways for the staff to think through overall, just ways to improve the rent stabilization administration more generally, education of landlords and tenants, and all of those things that strictly falls within the purview of our staff to do. We wouldn't necessarily ask RSG to give us suggestions on that per se. And so that is why that got pulled out as a separate resolve clause directed strictly to the staff.
That is correct.
So I would like to move that the word petition be added, because from what the discussion we just had, it sounds like it does fall within the capital improvement purview more than it does in the administration, and at least that's how I interpreted that. So I would ask that that word be added.
Okay. So Councilmember Landman made a motion to add petition to capital improvement pathways. Would someone like to second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Any points of discussion on this one? Okay. Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Landman.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
No.
Councilmember Schlegel.
Yes.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Abstain.
Councilmember Honzak.
Abstain.
Councilmember Wesselek.
No.
Mayor Cersey.
No,
So it fails.
it fails. Okay. All right. All right. Any other points of discussion? Councilmember Schlegel?
Okay, thank you everyone for considering my previous motion. Now I'd like to bring up the big one, which is where in this resolution can we mention this and emphasize the need to evaluate big policies like this through a racial equity lens? I'm sensing that there isn't enough support for consideration of our environmental climate response framework. I do see that as a significant potential impact if RSO changes encourage tear downs and new construction. Perhaps that's something that we can consider down the road. However, I'm very concerned about the eventuality that comes some months from now, we have received a number of policy recommendations, and we lack the expertise as a council to evaluate those in light of our racial equity lens. For example, if we receive recommendations about changing the exemption period for various types of properties, the question will naturally arise, what is the impact going to be on residents of color, not just in year one, but over 20 or 30 or even 50 years? What will be the legacy of this ordinance? And I worry that at that point, lacking the ability to call upon the expertise of anyone from outside, we could simply be arguing based on our own perspectives and maybe certainly not making the most informed decision possible. So I would like to propose that as an additional be it further resolved, we state, and I say this, Mayor, seriously, with all respect for how you weighed the pros and the cons on this. I'll propose a language and then I'll just say one other thing. So my proposed language would be it further resolved that staff ensure that a racial equity lens is applied in the consideration of policy options. I'll read it again. Be it further resolved that staff ensure that a racial equity lens is applied in the consideration of policy options. Maybe it should be staff will ensure. That would be in line with the first be it further resolved, the council directs staff. To the question of whether a racial equity analysis would increase costs of this review, I have two thoughts on that. One is that we're obligated to do a racial equity analysis for policies like this. So our hands are somewhat tied, and if we can't do it ourselves, we need to pay experts to do it. And so that leads to my second point, which is that I would be open to increasing the budget in this case for such an important question and obligation that we have as a city council.
Director McNally, would you like to address this item?
So I think some of the question that's going to come up is, I mean, obviously we can work with the consultant and say, hey, this is what we would like you to do and get a budget. I think the way that we had conceived it originally was that, you know, that equity analysis would be at the final report when we have kind of recommendations on the table. So I think the clarity that staff would be seeking is when we talk about a lens, are we talking about, you know, as we're moving through the public engagement process, are we individually with every single recommendation, even the ones that will not make it into the final report, are we looking at those? At what point are we starting to pull in significant chunks of data and modeling, or doing, you know, any sort of kind of additional research around these policy options? Because that will help us as staff come up with a number, because it'll depend on kind of what level and how deep we want to go. And I'm happy to kind of clarify that a little bit more if that wasn't clear.
I think that was pretty clear. I mean, one of the things that raised concerns for me, also because I do this type of work professionally, is that, you know, when you are, especially when your data is limited to begin with, and we saw that there was some limitations in terms of the data as it related to that initial analyses, it is often a lot easier when you whittle things down, but it also may present more instances where there isn't data that exists that would directly align with the policy option that is being put before you. And so you have to make even more assumptions to be able to do some of that analysis. And so I think that that's also a piece, and is that something that you all experienced during the first wave of doing the data, the substantial amount of data analysis that was done to get us to this point?
Yeah, typically, I mean, the let's call it easiest and probably most trustworthy source usually is census data, because that's created through the Census Bureau. They have statisticians, they have demographers who are on staff who are constantly doing what's called the American Community Survey, which uses 5-year estimates at a very local geographic level to produce pretty accurate estimates, is what they're called. And so those dive into topics such as housing, income, race data, migration data, that sort of stuff. So that data does exist. Then it becomes the question of what is that data telling us? And more importantly, how are we modeling the impacts? So I'll use an example that's used in housing policy, which is always about why do people move? People move for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's a reason such as, they had a disagreement with their landlord and it raised to an eviction. Sometimes it's they want to move into a better school district. Sometimes it's they got a job and it is now closer to move. So there are many reasons like that. And so when we talk about impact analysis, we're starting to kind of move away from what's on the ground and more into kind of forecasting. And that can be, it really depends on the assumptions that you're building into any sort of kind of model of the future. So the long and short of it is that there is some data out there, but it is not necessarily going to be a perfect crystal ball.
Yes, and if I might follow up on that, I do understand the incredible difficulty of looking at something through a racial equity lens. But in the 2017 resolution, the City Council foresaw that. It said the City Council acknowledges potential difficulties in assessing the impact of decisions on racial equity, but is committed to applying a racial equity lens in a systematic way in its decision-making processes. Let me propose one example of how the kinds of further research that we might be asking to RSG to do could lend themselves to some sort of racial equity analysis. Let's say that there's talk about looking at comparable cities' experiences. Now they could be looking at historically when a certain policy went into place, let's say it was 15 or 20 years ago, then what was the path that had demographically and socioeconomically within the area where the policy was applied. That kind of historical data could be available and could be accessed by experts with RSG. And then while that's not the same as looking into a crystal ball here in Tacoma Park, it would very much help to inform our thinking.
Yeah, I think that would be one way to tackle it, depending on what the program specifically was. What I would say with that is, I see that as a great master's thesis for an economics degree, or even, depending on it, even a PhD dissertation, depending on how deep it goes down.
Are you thus saying it's not possible?
I'm trying to more set expectations about the level of analysis. I understand there is a desire for data, and I certainly, we can sit down with RSG and talk about that piece and come up with a number. But I also understand that, we were all here for the many hours of public comment. People will look at the data and say, that wasn't enough. And staff is very acutely aware of that. And so what we try to do is bring the best data we can forward, understanding that there are constraints in terms of the availability of the data and then the level of analysis that we are going to be able to perform for the cost of that analysis.
Okay, I won't press this further. There may be other motions. I just would say that it's not for us to set the expectations. It's the City Council in 2017 set these expectations, and they're hard ones. But that's why I would like to see this be it further resolved clause.
And I will just say, as a member of the City Council in 2017, when this was established, we recognized very much so that the data necessary to do this work could be either a financial barrier or a technical barrier. So for example, census data for our area is very difficult to parse, even though you may see Tacoma Park, because there's Tacoma Park unincorporated, there's parts of the census tract that also includes Prince George's County. So when you're looking at Tacoma Park census data, it doesn't always align with our municipal boundaries, right? And so there's some efforts out there to try to help smaller municipalities like ours to try to compartmentalize and parse that data in a way that would make it more in alignment with what for our municipal boundaries. But right now, it doesn't really exist. And so I think that, I don't want to belabor the point because I see that there are other hands. I think the question at hand for us is not whether or not we should look at race equity. I think everybody agrees that when we get to the point where we have a smaller set of specific policy interventions that we as a council want to move forward, that then is the time to say, okay, let's take a look at the potential impacts of modifying the fair return petition to eliminate small landlords. I'm just making this up, right? Then it enables the consultants, it enables our staff to spend that limited time and spend that limited data in a more targeted way versus boiling the ocean, which is kind of what a lot of folks in research tend to do, which costs you a lot of money. Councilmember Landman.
First of all, you began in your presentation talking about we could not let this basically morph into a review of how every single one of our different policy frameworks could affect what we're doing here. And I'm sympathetic to that, and therefore I'm not pushing the point that we said we're in a climate emergency and we should be pursuing a review of things with respect to climate. Narrowing this to the focus on racial equity, I have a problem with the way it's being presented, that what we should do is wait until we have the policy recommendations and then make the decision that we are going to apply the racial equity lens. The problem is that the policy decisions that we make, as we narrow down the way we want this to go, that is too late to ask that question. It's not, this is our policy, what is the racial equity implication of this policy? It is, these are the policy options. We need to know the racial equity implications of those different policy options to make a decision which policy we want to pursue. So just, for example, on the most rough cut basis, if indeed changing the exemption from 5 years to 15 years is going to have the result of raising the rents substantially, which it looks like when you look at the way the newer buildings, the exemption came into effect later, the rents in the newer buildings are higher, the racial implications for the city are they're not that hard to calculate. You can give a racial equity lens analysis to something like that pretty quick and dirty, and we need to have that information when we make up our mind about which year-length exemption we want to look at. So I would object to the idea that we can do this later and it will be equally effective. I think it's important, and that we could have a very narrowly worded thing that simply says in the current be it resolved clause that at the end of policy options for consideration in the following areas, factoring in the city's racial equity framework adopted in Resolution 2017-2828. And we can ask the city council, the city staff, and the consultants to do a rough cut analysis on the implications for that issue, which is how many people who is going to be displaced and what are the income implications. And that would be, somewhere between the PhD thesis and waiting until we're already making the decision about a policy, what will be the implications of that policy. Otherwise, I don't feel that it's helpful to us in making a decision among policy options. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lamont. I will say what you just described at the end is a PhD level research project, just as an FYI, not trying, I understand what you're saying, but when you're saying, hey, I want to know who would potentially be displaced and what potential income levels, and if we are considering 5 years versus 10 years versus 15 years, the people that are doing that analysis will need to be able to slice and dice that data, and the impacts will be different based on the options that we put before them. So that is why I'm saying, in terms of costs and in terms of just kind of making sure that we're tight, that they're not spending money, time, and energy into pursuing avenues that there isn't council consensus on, and that they can then focus on those areas where we know for sure from the best practices and the like, we want them to do additional work. Councilmember Westlake.
Thank you. I similarly, I'm opposed to this addition because I feel like it really kind of expands and widens the scope of what we're asking in this resolution in a way that I feel like we all couldn't even be on the same page about. So to me, again, it is a resolution saying we want more information on these policy things. And if after that we have more questions in that regard, about racial equity and other things, then maybe we ask it then. But right now, we're already asking for a lot of information. So I would like us just move forward and stick to that. Which is why I'm opposed to this motion before us right now. And I just want to add, because it's now been mentioned, I think twice, an assumption that none of us, up till this point, I have heard looking into climate impacts and racial equity as potential considerations to add to this resolution. The conversation of the day is tonight. Two folks, I believe, have said that it's assumed that we would not support climate, but we would support racial equity. I'm not really sure where that is from. So I'm just making it clear that I think both are very important, and I would be opposed to adding either because of the same rationale. But I just wanted to clarify this idea that we're more on board with one than the other, because I don't know where that's coming from. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Wesselek. Okay, seeing no more lights, we have a motion on the floor to add a be it further resolved, and I just want to make sure I have this language right. Be it further resolved, I'm going to add some things if that's okay, that the city council directs staff to ensure, oh no, that's not what you said. Be it further resolved, staff ensure that a racial equity lens.
I'm fine if you mirror the language of the existing direct staff too. That seems.
Okay. Be it further resolved that the city council directs staff to ensure that a racial equity lens is considered.
I had said applied in the consideration of policy options.
Okay. Lens is applied in consideration of policy options. Is that right?
Yes, and I was fine with the interpolated language that Councilmember Lamon had proposed earlier. However, I think this probably accomplishes the same thing and perhaps more forcefully.
Okay. All right. Councilmember DeBala?
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't until it was read again that I wanted to share something. So it is also the council responsibility, not really the staff responsibility, to ensure that an equity lens that looks through. So I'm not comfortable with the way that it is phrased. I also concur with Councilmember Wesselek that signaling out one as opposed to the other of these two important interconnecting areas, that just doesn't seem right. It on some level it seems really obvious if 84% of the people who live in multifamily housing are people of color, and if half of them, I don't have the numbers in front of me, are low income, then anything that affects units will affect them. So do you need an analysis for that? On the other hand, being around also in 2017 when the policy was adopted, the level of detail that we operate in Tacoma Park, literally building by building, is not reflected in the available data, and to do anything that fine-grained is highly expensive. So I question whether we already know and can and absolutely should consider and account for, as a council, the impact of these issues, of these policy options. But I question whether it's worth spending what will be a lot of money to essentially prove the obvious. So I am not supportive of this for several reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, moved by Councilmember Schlegel, seconded by Councilmember Landman. Seeing no more lights, Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Landman. Aye. Councilmember DeBala.
No.
Councilmember Schlegel.
Yes.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Abstain.
Councilmember Hanzak.
No.
Councilmember Wesselek.
No.
Mayor Cersey.
No. Okay, so we are done. So now it looks like we're done with amendments, and just trying to check to make sure it was not amended. All right, so with that, we're going to do our final vote on providing direction to staff and the consultant regarding the rent stabilization policy review. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Landman.
Can you come back to me, please?
Councilmember DeBala.
But can we do that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to argue the point. We are voting on whether to accept the resolution as proposed by the mayor?
Correct.
Yeah, then I vote yes.
Councilmember Schlegel.
With concerns about the ongoing commitment to our racial equity framework, I'm voting no.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Yes.
Councilmember Hanzak.
Yes.
Councilmember Wesselek.
Aye.
Councilmember Landman.
Abstain.
Mayor Cersey.
Aye. Okay, all right, so next, final item for this evening is a work session on the multi-year tree planting contract. I have no idea who's introducing that one. Okay.
He might be. He should be. Okay.
Rudy, you can kick it off. You're muted.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I guess my microphone is not working, but my headset is, but that means my camera's off. Sorry about that. So we have a planting contract with Casey Trees, lasted 2 years and 2 years worth of extension. It's set to expire on August 18th. And I'm introducing a new contract. We went out to RFP. Casey Trees was our only bidder, but we went through the review committee and thought that it qualified the prerequisites for having them as a bidder. And the work would be for planting in the right-of-way and for the Tree Tacoma program.
Wait a minute, did we lose you, Rudy?
Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you now.
Well, I'm not sure if I cut off or anything, but that is the gist of it.
You were officially done. Okay, awesome.
Yes.
All right. Councilmember Schlegel, did you have any questions on this one?
Yes, Mr. Delsack, thank you very much. I just have two questions. One was, as you know, a group of residents associated with Friends of Native Trees Tacoma has been advocating for care given in the contract with Casey Trees for the mix of trees to be planted, and maybe in the case of one species, whether it should be planted. In relation to this contract, do you get into discussions with Casey about their supply chain and what they can make available?
Yes. So this year specifically, We have set a biodiversity limit, which we have never had before. Basically, at the end of the year, we can plant no more than 30% of one family of tree, 20% of one genus, and 10% of one species. And that is a fairly common standard for most municipalities. Sometimes where other municipalities are aiming for tighter restrictions, 20-10-5. But with our limited planting palette, 30-20-10 is the standard we're going for. And we have worked together with Font very closely with multiple meetings and requests, and we've decided to take off that Quercus texana nuttall oak from the species list.
Exactly. Thanks for reminding me of the name. And I know that group has been persistent and very well informed and well intentioned, and I'd appreciate your responsiveness and other staff members as well. My other question was about kind of the program of planting on private property and returning to questions that have been raised in the past about whether residents in some neighborhoods tend to be more informed about the opportunity, tend to get more access to the program, tend to use up tree planting quotas or availability before residents in other neighborhoods, and what kind of steps are being taken to try to remedy such a pattern if it exists.
So all residents in Tacoma Park are eligible for the program. Anyone who applies will get a tree if they want. We do not prioritize a specific area. As you guys are aware, the Urban Forestry Division is made up of just myself. With these time constraints, outreach is a challenge. But I have a fairly regular communication with the public when I'm out doing tree inspections, tree removal permits, constantly reminding residents that these programs exist. Also, in all of our permitting, they send these automated permit messages, and these permit messages advertise the Tree Tacoma program, specifically for the tree removal permit, saying this property removed the tree. Please be aware of this program that exists so you can rebuild the canopy. And this would go to any resident of all wards.
Thank you. I know canopy is canopy wherever we can get it, but I'm sure we're all aware of the need to make sure that this, with other programs, is geographically dispersed in a way, and also maybe taking advantage of as much as possible people who could not afford to plant a tree on their own.
Yeah.
Councilmember Honzak?
Yes, thank you, Rudy. This is such a great program. You just said every household who wants a tree can get one. Is it true in the past year that we have not made our way all the way through the list? We have a waiting list, am I correct?
Correct. So with the contract with Casey Trees ending August 18th, we are not sending them to Casey Trees to set up a consultation, because we are not 100% sure that Casey Trees is going to be awarded the renewed contract. And so only for the reason that we are waiting for contract approval, that is why we are accepting applications but not sending it yet to Casey Trees.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, there is no waiting list that's not able to be moved forward.
Fulfilled.
In fact, when we get to the budget amendment next week, you'll see that we're requesting to move tree planting money from 26 into 27 because it was unspent.
So in other words, you do expect to get to every request that we have had, is what you're saying? Because previously I thought I remembered that wasn't necessarily the case, and we did move some money, but I still wasn't clear on that.
Yeah, the
Yes.
request process is kind of lengthy in that people have to apply, and then they have the site visit, and then they have options in front of them. They make the choice. Ultimately, 1 tree, 4 trees, it's all available. We haven't had a situation where we have said we've got this list of 17 applicants and we can't move forward. The limitation right now is just a contractual limitation with the end of one contract and the beginning of the other.
Well, congratulations. That's great to hear, to you and to Rudy. And so with the point in mind that Councilmember Schlegel was making, which is, I think, a very important one, it sounds like time or making quotas, for example, for different neighborhoods might not be an effective strategy given our current information dissemination capacity and so I guess my question to you and but I like the gist of where you're going with that, Councilmember Schlegel. I wonder if you could suggest to us, because I know you have given it quite a bit of thought and even tried some strategies, given your one-man team, what, in both of your opinions, would be required from council in order to, if anything, in order to possibly penetrate further into some of the neighborhoods where we don't have as much traction, for example, with multifamily buildings where it would be very nice. Let's say there's plenty of open space, there's sunshine, trees would be a great benefit to that part of the neighborhood because there aren't as many, et cetera. I'm sure you've given this some thought, but if you can't answer it fully, I appreciate that too. But could you give just a few thoughts on what you think would be the basic requirements?
And Rudy, let me jump in
So-
here, and then you can
Sure.
add too, because I have the sort of bigger picture of the historic spread from when we started this program. In the initial years, there was a lot of effort, both through an intern as well as our arborists, to reach out specifically to multifamily and commercial buildings. And we collaborated with HCD to get some of the contacts and names. We will continue that type of collaboration. It's very time intensive and difficult. So I think the best way to do it is for us to continue to advertise and make sure it's well known on the city's website and the city's newsletter through council listservs and whatnot. And then to collaborate with our partners in HCD if they have programs where they're informing multifamily owners about anything, make sure that this program is included in the list. Same with commercial property owners. So I think that that's probably the best avenue for us to make progress in continuing to advertise this, is to work with existing staff and existing programs, and if there's an overlap, to make sure that this program is included in the information that's provided.
And is that currently an approach that your team has had the capacity to already implement? Because I don't have the impression that that's necessarily been there. That would require cross-departmental collaboration. And I'm not saying that never happens, but is that already in play, or is it something that might require or be motivated by some motion by council?
I don't think it'll need to be emphasized by council. I think on a staff level, there's awareness of it and an interest in it. I guess Devin's already gone, so I can't speak to that, but I know it was very aggressively pursued in the first 2 years with very little result. So that's part of the challenge. So we have very few levers in which we have those types of opportunities to speak to commercial property owners and multifamily owners and make sure they're aware of this. So it is a bit of a challenge, but when the HCD office has those interactions and has those programs, we want to make sure that they are including this as a program for those audiences.
Okay, then I'll keep my comments from here, Mayor tight, but please, I invite Rudy and your shop and HCD to reach out to council members and tell us specifically where a tree or 2 or 3 would be very useful in the canopy cover on multifamily properties, and allow us in our capacity to do some of that on the ground legwork so that we can maybe help generate demand. Thank you.
Sure. I mean,
If I could jump in really quick. I have partnered with the Sustainability Manager and the MFBIG program. We visited, I think, around 10 multifamily properties together. My role there was to advertise the Tree Tacoma program. Every multifamily location was in wards 5 or 6. Very lengthy conversations, a lot of time involved. And unfortunately, we did not get any applications from the multifamily properties.
And I think in general, anywhere and if you have any contact with a multifamily property owner, they likely have space available. There's very few lots in the city that don't have space available. So always, good idea to just let them know this program exists and send them the link to the website.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Councilmember DeBala?
Yes, I just wanted to thank Rudy for doing this presentation. And I think they're both great programs, and I appreciate the outreach that you've done with council members about the public tree planting and what's going in where and what's coming out where, and all of that is very, very helpful for us. And I agree with council member Honzak that perhaps council members can help with the multifamily stuff. What I'm curious about is what kind of feedback did you get from the multifamily building owners in the MFBIG program? If you had that many home building owners saying they didn't want trees, was there any theme or concern?
They all specified interest, and I followed up with emails, but I never actually received an application.
Okay,
for,
so
from the
interest, but
locations.
not follow through,
Yeah.
not high on their list. Okay, that's fair. Great. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you very much, Councilmember
Oh,
DeBala.
and to the point of the presentation, I'm fine with going with Casey Trees if they're the only applicant, but they were a good applicant.
Yes, I agree.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilmember DeBala and Rudy and Director Braithwaite. Thank you all for continuing to push the needle forward in protecting and increasing our tree canopy. And I agree with Councilmember DeBala. Casey Trees has been a great partner with the city of Tacoma Park. And so look forward to continuing that partnership with this next contract. And so with that, not seeing any additional lights, I think it's time for us to call it quits. Is everybody all right for us to adjourn this evening? Wonderful. Everybody have a great night.